The air in the St. Jude's Cathedral was thick, with the scent of lilies and betrayal. It is funny how lilies are used for both weddings and funerals. Today, it felt like both. I stood there, draped in a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than most people make in a decade, but the lace felt like a shroud. My veil was a thin barrier between me and the monster standing opposite me. Thatcher looked breathtaking. He wore a charcoal suit that complemented the predatory glint in his eyes, a glint everyone else mistook for love. When he took my hand at the altar, his palm was dry, his grip firm. He squeezed my fingers, leaning in to whisper, "You look stunning, Octavia. Finally, everything is where it belongs." He wasn't talking about me. He was talking about the Prescott Empire. Behind him, in the third row, sat Giselle. She was dressed in a shade of champagne that was just a bit too close to white, a silent insult. She caught my eye and offered a slow, triumphant blink. She thought she had already won. She thought they were about to walk away with the keys to my father's life's work. I looked at the priest, then at the heavy mahogany box sitting on the side table near the altar, the box Thatcher thought contained our marriage license. I felt a cold, sharp calm settle over me. The girl who loved Thatcher had died 3 days ago. The woman standing here now was Arthur Prescott's daughter. And if there was one thing my father taught me, it was that you never destroy an enemy quickly. You let them build their dream house, and then you set fire to the foundation while they are trapped inside. To understand how I ended up at the altar with a snake, you have to understand the loneliness of being an heiress. My life was a series of boardrooms, private jets, and people who only wanted to know me so they could get a meeting with my father. Then came Thatcher. It was a rainy Tuesday at the Prescott Global headquarters. I was struggling with the espresso machine in the break room, a mundane task I usually avoided. "The trick is to double-press the steam valve," a voice said. I turned to see a man with an easy smile, and eyes that seemed to hold genuine warmth. He didn't bow. He didn't stumble over his words. He just fixed my coffee and introduced himself as a junior analyst. For the first 6 months, Thatcher was the perfect gentleman. He didn't ask about my trust fund. He didn't ask for a promotion. In fact, he turned down my offer to help him move up the corporate ladder. "I want to earn my place, Octavia," he told me one evening as we walked through Central Park. "I want you to be proud of the man I am, not the man your father made me." That was his greatest weapon, his feigned humility. He made me feel like a normal girl, not a dollar sign. He would take me to dive bars where nobody knew my name, and we would talk for hours about philosophy, architecture, and the families we hoped to have. He told me about his childhood in a small town, about his mother who worked 3 jobs. My heart bled for him. I wanted to give him the world, because he acted like he didn't want a penny of it. By the end of the first year, I was convinced I had found the 1 in a million man. My father, Arthur, was a hard man to please. He had spent 40 years building a shipping and tech empire. He was suspicious of everyone, but Thatcher played him like a violin. He stayed late at the office, not to impress me, but to learn from my father. He would bring my father rare books on maritime history and sit with him during his dialysis treatments when I couldn't be there. "He's a good lad, Octavia," my father whispered from his hospital bed one night. "He has the hunger I had when I was young. He'll take care of you when I'm gone." The engagement was a grand affair. Thatcher proposed on a private balcony in Tuscany. The ring was modest. He said he bought it with his own savings, not a loan. I cried. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I didn't realize then that the modest ring was just a part of the costume. He was playing the role of the honest man so well that he deserved an Oscar. We began planning the wedding of the century. But as the guest list grew, so did Thatcher's influence in the company. He was no longer a junior analyst. He was the executive vice president of operations. My father had handed him the keys, and I had handed him my heart. We were a week away from the wedding, and I was living in a dream. The dream started to dissolve on a Monday evening, exactly 4 weeks before the ceremony. Thatcher had started the merger, a massive deal with a European conglomerate that would double our company's value. He was stressed, or so he claimed. He started sleeping in the guest room, saying he didn't want to wake me up with his late-night conference calls. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. The house was silent, but I saw a sliver of light under the library door. I walked down the hallway, barefoot, intending to bring him a glass of water. As I reached the door, I heard voices. "Relax, Thatcher," a woman whispered. It was Giselle. the woman he had insisted we hire as a consultant for the merger. The old man is barely lucid. The doctors say his heart is failing. He'll be gone before the first quarterly report. It's not him I'm worried about, Thatcher's voice replied. It was cold, devoid of the warmth he usually showed me. It's Octavia. She's starting to ask questions about the offshore accounts. She's smarter than she looks. She's a pampered princess, Giselle mocked. I could hear the sound of ice clinking in a glass. Once the ghost clause is signed in the marriage contract, she won't have a say. You'll be the chairman, and she'll be a housewife on an allowance. And then, we can finally stop hiding. There was a silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of a kiss. I stood in the hallway, my breath hitching in my throat. My first instinct was to burst in, to scream, to throw the glass of water in his face. But then I remembered my father's favorite chess move, the gambit. You sacrifice a piece to win the game. I realized that if I confronted them now, Thatcher would have time to move the money, to hide the evidence, and to perhaps even hurt my father. I retreated to my room, my heart feeling like it had been shredded by glass. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the sun rise, realizing that every kiss, every "I love you," every moment of the last 2 years had been a calculated investment for him. He wasn't marrying me. He was staging a hostile takeover. The next day, I began my own investigation. I didn't use my usual assistant. Thatcher had replaced her with someone loyal to him. Instead, I contacted Soren, a man who had been my father's secret fixer for 30 years. Soren lived in a modest house in the suburbs, away from the prying eyes of the corporate world. When I showed him the merger documents Thatcher had asked me to co-sign, Soren's face went pale. Octavia, this isn't a merger, Soren said, pointing to a tiny paragraph buried in 500 pages of legal jargon. This is a liquidation plan. Thatcher is setting it up so that the moment you are married, your father's assets are transferred to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A company owned by a G. Moretti. Is that Giselle? Yes, I whispered, the word feeling like ash in my mouth. And there's more, Soren continued. He's been slowly poisoning your father's reputation with the board. He's been filing reports saying Arthur is suffering from early onset dementia. He's trying to get him declared incompetent, so he can take full control of the voting shares the second the ring is on your finger. It was a total assassination of our lives. Thatcher wanted the money, the power, and the legacy. And he wanted to leave my father and me with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a mountain of fabricated debt. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 48 hours before the wedding. I had installed a keylogger on the private laptop Thatcher kept in his gym bag. I felt dirty doing it, but the dirt was nothing compared to what I found. I found a folder titled Project Phoenix. It contained photos of me, not romantic ones, but photos of me leaving my therapist's office, photos of me crying after my mother passed away, photos of me looking vulnerable. Under each photo were notes on how to manipulate my emotional state. Octavia is feeling insecure about the company. Use the normal girl narrative. Reiterate that I am her only true ally. It was a manual. He had studied me like a lab rat. He knew my triggers, my fears, and my dreams. And he had used them to build a cage around me. But the most heartbreaking discovery was an audio file. It was a recording of Thatcher and Giselle in a hotel room. Do you think she actually loves you? Giselle asked in the recording. Thatcher laughed. A hollow, cruel sound. She's pathetic, Giselle. She's so desperate for someone to see her for who she is that she's blind to everything else. I have to physically cringe every time I have to touch her. But it's worth it. For $50 billion, I can pretend to love a rock. I closed the laptop. The tears I thought I would cry didn't come. Instead, a burning, white-hot rage took their place. I looked at the wedding dress hanging on the door. It was a beautiful, expensive lie. Thatcher thought I was a pampered princess. He thought my father was a dying old man. He forgot that the Prescott bloodline didn't start with billions. It started with a man who fought his way out of the slums. I called Soren. Soren, I need you to do 3 things. First, I need the counter clause drafted. Second, I need you to secure my father's medical records from an independent hospital. And third, I want you to invite a very specific group of people to the wedding. People Thatcher hasn't seen in years. What are you planning, Octavia? Soren asked. His voice, trembling slightly, Thatcher wants a wedding he'll never forget, I said, looking at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked different, sharper, older. I'm going to give him a grand finale. He thinks he's the one holding the pen? I'm about to rewrite his entire life. I went downstairs and joined Thatcher for our last dinner as an engaged couple. He talked about our future home in Switzerland. He talked about the children we would have. I sat there, nodding, smiling, and sipping my wine, knowing that every word out of his mouth was a nail in his own coffin. To us, he said, raising his glass. To us, I replied. And to the truth, may it always come to light. He didn't even notice the edge in my voice. He was too busy looking at the clock, counting down the hours until he thought he would own me. Little did he know, the clock wasn't ticking for my surrender. It was ticking for his destruction. The music shifted. The wedding march began to play, its triumphant chords echoing through the vaulted ceilings of the cathedral. I took a deep breath, the heavy fabric of my gown feeling like armor rather than lace. My father, Arthur, sat in the front row in his wheelchair, a pale shadow of the man he once was. But his eyes, those sharp Prescott eyes, were fixed on me. He knew. We had spent the last 48 hours in a silent alliance. I walked down the aisle, every step deliberate. Thatcher stood at the altar, his smile radiant, his posture that of a king about to be crowned. As I reached him, he took my hand and whispered, "Ready to change our lives forever?" "More than you know," I replied. My voice steady, the ceremony proceeded like a well-oiled machine. The vows were exchanged. His were poetic lies. Mine were a legal trap. Then came the moment of the signing. Usually, the signing of the registry happens in a quiet corner. But Thatcher had insisted on doing it at the altar, in front of everyone, to celebrate our union of hearts and minds. Soren, my father's lawyer, stepped forward with the mahogany box. He placed a thick stack of documents on the ornate table. Thatcher picked up the gold pen, his fingers trembling slightly with excitement. He quickly signed the pages he thought were the ghost clause and the spousal asset transfer. He didn't even read them. He was so blinded by the finish line that he didn't see the hurdle. As he finished, I took the pen. But instead of signing, I turned to the congregation. "Before we conclude," I said, my voice projected by the hidden lapel mic I was wearing, "I want to share a tribute to the man who worked so hard to get here. Thatcher, you've spent 2 years preparing for this moment. It's only fair that everyone sees the Project Phoenix you've been working on." The giant screens on either side of the altar, meant to show a montage of our romance, suddenly flickered to life. But it wasn't photos of us at the beach. It was the audio recording of Thatcher and Giselle from the hotel room. "She's pathetic, Giselle. I have to physically cringe every time I have to touch her. For $50 billion, I can pretend to love a rock." The gasp from the guests was like a sudden gust of wind. Thatcher's face went from triumphant to ghostly white in 3 seconds. He turned to the tech booth, screaming for them to shut it off, but Soren stood in his way. "That's not all," I continued, walking toward the front row. "Thatcher, you thought you were signing over my father's empire to yourself, but you should have read the fine print on page 42 of the documents you just signed." I held up the carbon copy. "The documents you just signed weren't asset transfers. They were a full, irrevocable confession of corporate espionage and a reverse indemnity clause. By signing these, you have legally admitted to embezzling funds into the G. Moretti accounts. And because those accounts were flagged by the FBI this morning, the law now recognizes those funds as stolen property." Giselle, sitting in the third row, tried to stand up and leave. But 2 plainclothes officers, men Thatcher thought were wedding security, quietly stepped into the aisle and blocked her path. "You see, Thatcher," I said, stepping closer to him until our noses almost touched. "You thought I was a pampered princess who didn't understand the family business. But I am Arthur Prescott's daughter. I didn't just inherit his money, I inherited his brain. While you were busy cringing at the thought of touching me, I was busy liquidating every personal asset you ever owned. Your penthouse? It's in my name now. Your offshore accounts? Frozen. Your reputation? You're listening to it die on those speakers." Thatcher lunged for me, his face contorted in rage. The perfect gentleman mask finally shattered. "You bitch! You can't do this. I have contracts. You have nothing." My father's voice rang out. He stood up from his wheelchair, supported by Soren. His voice was weak, but filled with a terrifying authority. I may be old, Thatcher, but I'm not incompetent. I watched you try to kill my legacy. My daughter didn't just save the company today. She showed me that it's in better hands than mine ever were. The police moved in. As they handcuffed Thatcher in his $5,000 wedding suit, I took the diamond ring off my finger. The modest ring he claimed he bought with his savings. By the way, I whispered as the officers led him away. Soren tracked this ring. You bought it using a corporate credit card from the charity fund for orphans. You're not just a gold digger, Thatcher. You're cheap. The cathedral emptied quickly. The wedding of the century had become the scandal of the decade. I sat on the altar steps. The heavy white dress spread out around me like a fallen cloud. My father came over and placed a hand on my shoulder. We didn't need words. The silence was finally honest. I looked at the camera, my eyes reflecting a mixture of exhaustion and newfound strength. To every woman watching this, I said, my voice softening. We are raised to believe in the fairy tale. We are taught that if we find someone who says the right things and smiles the right way, we should hand over our hearts, and sometimes our power. But love isn't supposed to be a blindfold. Thatcher didn't fail because he wasn't smart. He failed because he underestimated a woman's ability to be both emotional and logical. He thought my love was a weakness he could exploit. He didn't realize that my love was a choice, and the moment he betrayed that choice, it became my weapon. Never let a man make you feel like you are lucky to have him. Never let your heart grow so big that it crowds out your intuition. If a man wants to be part of your empire, make sure he's building it with you, not digging a tunnel underneath it. Your worth isn't measured by the ring on your finger, but by the strength of the boundaries you set. I stood up, took off the heavy veil, and left it lying on the cold stone floor of the church. I walked out of the cathedral into the bright afternoon sun, not as a bride, and not as a victim. I was Octavia Prescott, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just an heiress. I was the architect of my own destiny. If you found out your partner was using you for your success or money, would you end it quietly, or would you wait for the perfect moment to take everything back? Tell me your revenge strategy in the comments below.